So what I wanted to talk about today is the postures we take in our practice. So this is an extension a bit of a talk I gave for our Zazenkai about a week and a half ago. And so those of you who were here for that, there'll be some overlap, but there's also some new material that I wanted to bring in on this material on the postures. I think the video is up, I know, about that talk, so some of you may have seen that, and I think that came out pretty good, so you might want to check that out too, if this one is of interest to you. So the forms we take in our Zen practice, the physical form of our Zazen posture, and the mental positions that we take are the way that we study the self in Zen. There's a famous teaching from our lineage, which is to study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be awakened by the 10,000 things. So, how do we study the self, and how does study lead to forgetting the self? That's really something of what I'm going to be talking about here. The way we study the self is that we take these postures of body and mind and we work with them to explore the terrain that opens up in our efforts to hold the posture. And we notice the things that get in the way of us holding the posture, that interrupt or side channel or complicate our attempts to hold these postures. So we apply our intention to holding these particular postures, and that's all important. Saying, I'm going to establish this posture of body and or mind, and have that be the baseline. Okay. And then we see how our intentions go awry, if you will, or not immediately manifested. And what happens as a result. So when we look at the body, there's this physical form of Zazen, which is extremely important. The seated meditation posture is considered the ideal posture for the development of samadhi, concentration, concentrated awareness. It's not too loose and not too tight. A posture that's more like lying down or too relaxed tends to lead towards sleep, and postures that are more active, walking or running or even standing, can elicit more activity in the body and mind. So this is the seating meditation posture is the perfect combination of relaxation and alertness, I like to say. So it gives us a very good grounding with knees and legs and seat, however you may be, whether you're in a chair, whatever posture you're holding in your legs. Very good grounding. And then the opportunity to, in a very relaxed way, extend up from the base with a dignified and alert, conscious connection to the sky. So it's a wonderful form. And within this form, by relaxing our muscles, right, when we're in this Zazen posture, we're allowing the balance of our skeletal system hold the posture as best we can, as opposed to exertion of the musculature in order to hold the posture. And now this takes practice to develop the ease of being able to sit in a balanced way where the muscles aren't exerted. I mean, it takes years, actually, to train the body. And the training itself is just so rich. It's so rich to moment by moment, period by period, day by day, week by week, is to notice the typical holdings that we'll have and the typical exertions that we're doing. We notice a habit pattern perhaps of leaning forward. And with all of the muscular exertion that entails, right? Suddenly now gravity is pulling down, our head is really heavy. So suddenly we're putting all sorts of strain on our neck and on our shoulders just with that, even inch movement forward with the head. And then over time, as we over and over and over again rebalance ourselves, and then notice that blissful relief that we get when we're no longer exerting to hold ourselves up like that. It's very liberating. The mind, so there's something that happens in the mind when we relax into balance. It's a wonderful physical cue that Gakyo reminded me of many years ago, and she always brings into her introductions that we do now, is to tilt the pelvis forward like a bowl tilting water out of its brim. And that just straightens up the spine beautifully all the way up through the neck and the crown of the head. The whole body just kind of organizes itself in this beautiful, wonderful way. There's such an intimate connection between the body and the mind. In fact, they're not separate at all. In our Buddhist understanding, we say that all physical phenomena have a mental component, and all mental phenomena have a physical component. So it's when you really land with that, it's kind of mind-blowing in a way, I think. You say, my physical experience of, say, a certain idea, let's say the word freedom. So I have a physical association with the word freedom. You could say that, what that means to me. And you have your physical association with the word freedom. It's probably similar to my physical sensation of the word freedom, but it's yours. You're feeling it. When you look at it the other way too, it's somewhat astounding. All of these physical sensations that we're feeling, have some sort of mental component to it. So some sort of neurological brain activity is kind of associating with that sensation. When we look at the skandhas, which you can do more on Wednesday, we see that that's actually what produces a lot of our suffering, is the extensive network of mental associations that are generated by physical sensations, which in turn, because both directions are operating, can produce feelings in the body, which then have their own network of mental associations. So we have a very complicated and implicated web of mental and physical associations that are unfolding. This is conditioned consciousness. To have all of this play out unconsciously. But when we bring consciousness to these associations, then that's the doorway to the awareness which underlies our ground of being, which is our ground of being. So I say the gap between this form, this posture that we are intentionally trying to hold, and the automatic activity of our bodies and minds, which are resisting or moving away from this form or posture that we're trying to hold. This is the ground of our practice. It's the gap between those things. So we have these habituated mental postures. Right? You know, we've got names for them. They're basically our biases or our frames. Right? So we might have a internalized kind of position that I'm going to use an hopefully older school example. You know, a woman in a business meeting, her contribution is not, you know, substantive. Okay, so we call that sexism. Okay? We can have an internalized view that, you know, people of a certain race behave a certain way or hold certain beliefs. Racism, right? That's a mental posture. These are mental postures that we're holding within ourselves. We can have self-limiting postures that there are certain things that I can't do. So it's a position that we're taking with respect to ourselves or with respect to others. That preconditions how we're going to hold ourselves, how we're going to interact. So in our practice, we're going to intentionally take a new posture, a different posture. So the 4 postures that I've shared from my Dharma brother, Zenki Roshi's Path of Aliveness book. I'll say them briefly here again. We take these intentional postures of stillness, non-reactivity, non-thinking, and non-interference. So we apply ourselves to trying to be still. So the stillness of the body is very workable. It's the gross level, you know. I can notice when your body isn't still. I can't always notice if your mind isn't still. Sometimes, yes, but we can all tell when others' bodies, you know, aren't still. So it's a very workable level. Right? And we're holding our posture, and we notice, you know, we're not being still. Now you might look really still to someone looking, you know, casually from the other side of the room, whereas you notice the shifts of gravity and holdings, and you might notice yourself moving in a way that others aren't. So you are the most intimate observer, obviously, of your own stillness of body. You're also applying yourself to the stillness of your mind. So that's what our basic practice is. Shikantaza, breath practice. Both of these are turning the light of your attention on the activity of your mind. So that you see what's happening. The awareness, which is continuously attentive to the movement of your mind, is itself still. That's not moving. So we practice returning again and again to that still, pointed awareness of mental activity in the same way that we keep returning our body over and over to the stillness of posture. If we didn't have the movement or activity of our mind, we wouldn't notice the stillness. Would we? We would just be completely still. Okay? If we didn't have movement and motion, we wouldn't know or appreciate the stillness of our body. See? So the point is not to eradicate movement or eradicate activity at all. We can't stop ourselves from thinking. We don't want to stop ourselves from moving. It's just an intentional posture we're taking to develop our awareness of the ground of our being within which all of this movement and activity is happening. All the movement and activity is wonderful and beautiful and rich, and that's our life. Life is movement. William Faulkner said that. I think he was maybe quoting the French philosopher Henri Bergson. Life is movement. It's all of this movement, all of this change. And we're not trying to stop it at all. We're just taking a posture with this body-mind in order to really enrich and enliven our consciousness. And there's an opening of consciousness that happens when we practice in this way. That's what we're practicing for here. See, actually these breakthroughs of consciousness come when the stillness is punctured or broken. You might have heard the famous haiku from the poet Basho. The old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. The old pond is just still. It's the stillness of our ground of being. But there maybe is something a little static or inert. Inert's not the right word. It hasn't been really realized. It's when the frog jumps in, plop! There is where the universe is created. Master Gensha famously had a huge awakening, his big awakening experience, by stubbing his toe. He left his teacher Seppo and he went on a pilgrimage. And he stubbed his toe badly, it started bleeding. And he just investigated that right in the instant, that feeling of the pain that shot through his foot. And there was something of an inquiry, what's this? What is this? He'd done a lot of Zazen practice up until that point, so his body-mind was tuned to investigate this phenomena that arose within him. In fact, he knew the teachings of, well, there's no fixed self. Okay, so he's exploring this, there's no fixed self. And then there's the inquiry that came up as he stubbed his toe. Well, who's feeling this? You know, if there's no self, then what the hell is this? Because this is real. Okay. So I'm putting words to what it was not really a verbal process. It was a process of consciousness that broke through his habituated understanding about himself in that moment. There was, you might say, there was no Gensha, but there also was Gensha. Right? There was sensation, there was identification, there was, meaning a limited identification. But there was a break in the skandhas. So the whole kind of self-structure, which usually gets created around our sensations. Oh, I just burned my finger. Okay, that comes, there's no gap. There is a gap, but it's very, we don't experience the gap between I burned my finger and then between ouch and I burned my finger. Right? And then with the mind that we cultivate in Zazen allows there to be a breakthrough moment, an interruption in the creation of the self that happens in that moment. But we need the burn, we need the stub toe, we need the frog to jump into the pond. We need life to stir us up. Right? So it's not just about like being still all the time. That's what I'm really trying to bring home here. Okay, these are postures we're taking as practice. It's not the ideal that we're trying to maintain. And people, sometimes think this, and they get this idea that we're cultivating this really calm stillness, that we're supposed to be this way all the time. When we're meeting people, talking to people, facing work and conflicts and all of this. No, this is a mode of practice. So we're cultivating breakthroughs in consciousness. So now we're fully alive to the phenomena of our lives. And now we act fully. Like yell ow and reach down and take care of your toe. That's enlightened action that comes from that interruption. So we continually practice engaging with the ground of being in this way. It's not a one and done thing. Or maybe I should say, it is one, but it's never done. Uchiyama Roshi wrote, and he was referring to Gensha's enlightenment here, stubbing his toe. Despite having handled the current pain moment by moment, if I encounter this terrific pain again, I would only be fooling myself if I thought the past experience would help me get through the current pain. This is a delusion. We have to meet or encounter one at a time these painful experiences. We are not saved by past enlightenment. It has to be fresh and new. Dried enlightenment doesn't work. I'd never heard that before today when I found this. Dried enlightenment doesn't work. Right? So this is important, right? I mean, it's wonderful to have these experiences of interrupting the self-consciousness around our experience and then really embracing it and facing it and feeling it and then acting in accord with it. It's great. But now you can't turn that, you can't bottle that. There's no way to bottle that. Here's how I'm supposed to respond when this happens. Nope. Now it's just gone up into a mental agenda. You're cultivating the capacity in the mind to continue to face the suffering, the pain, the joy, moment by moment by moment. So life becomes very rich and bigger. So that's why you have to keep practicing. because it gets bigger and bigger and richer, and there's more and more that we feel. We have to keep practicing. Those of us who are, many of us here, just we're way past the ability to stop practicing. We just can't do it. We have to continue to maintain the capacity to hold and be responsive to our lives. And this becomes ultimately more and more enjoyable, richer and more enjoyable. This path, it's such a wonderful path. Yeah, what used to be if afflictive pain becomes almost an enjoyable sensation of being alive. So the last thing I want to say is just how the form of our retreats, work in this same way, right? When we devote ourselves to a day of practice according to a session schedule, we're taking a certain posture. We're actually allowing our life force, in a way, to take a certain posture, or a certain series of postures, you could say. We have our regular lifestyle, our habits of sleep and diet and activity and work and rest. Those are a series of postures that we've established, to make our life in the world and our work kind of functional, right? And they serve that activity. But the session schedules is very intentional about serving as practice for awakening. So to say, I'm going to do that retreat, I'm going to do that one day or that 2 day in the middle of the month, that means I'm going to enter into this posture, and this schedule is a non-stop, continuous posture that we take. And we just try our best, and we open up this rich ground in between what our habituated conditioning wants to do and the thoughts that are developed, and then being selflessly engaged in this activity. And that's extremely strong practice, to be able to do a dedicated day of practice at least once a month. And that's what I'm going to recommend everybody in this Sangha do over the course of Ango, to do the retreats that we have available over this fall. Because that's what really galvanizes and empowers your practice. And it can really change your life. Really change your life. To dedicate to a practice of monthly retreats.